Thomas did not rush. That was the first thing everyone in the room noticed, even if they couldn't name it. He didn't move like someone reacting to a situation. He moved like someone who had already understood it before arriving. He stepped toward Eleanor's bedside, setting a slim leather folder on the table beside her without breaking eye contact. "You look better than I expected," he said. "I feel better than they expected," Eleanor replied. A flicker of understanding passed between them, quiet, precise. Daniel shifted his stance. "I'm sorry, but we're in the middle of a medical discussion." Thomas finally turned to him fully. "And I'm here because that discussion has already crossed into legal territory," he said calmly. The room tightened, not with noise, with awareness. Michael leaned forward. "Legal? What are you talking about?" Thomas didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he opened the leather folder and removed a set of documents, placing them neatly on the table. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, still composed, "do you confirm that your prior directives remain unchanged?" Eleanor didn't hesitate. "I do." Daniel stepped closer now, tension no longer hidden. "What directives?" Thomas glanced at him briefly. "The kind that prevent misunderstandings," he said, that word again, misunderstandings, but now it sounded different, sharper. More deliberate. Miss Patel straightened slightly in her chair. "Sir, I need to understand your role here." Thomas gave her a polite nod. "Thomas Avery, attorney, I represent Mrs. Whitmore." Silence followed, short, heavy. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, you didn't tell us you had a lawyer involved." Eleanor looked at him steady. "You didn't ask the right questions," she said. That landed harder than anything raised or emotional ever could, because it was true. And truth, when stated plainly, has a way of stripping away the illusion of control. Thomas continued, as if the interruption had never happened. "Given the circumstances," he said, "I'll need to ensure that all discussions regarding her care, residence, and decision-making authority are documented appropriately." Miss Patel nodded slowly. "That's standard when representation is involved." Daniel let out a quiet breath, trying to recalibrate. "No one is trying to take anything from her," he said. Thomas met his eyes directly now. "I didn't say you were," he replied. A pause, then almost casually, "But you're certainly moving in that direction." The air in the room shifted again. Michael stood up from his chair. "That's not fair." "Fairness isn't the issue," Thomas said. "Clarity is." Eleanor watched her sons carefully, not emotionally, not reactively, observing. Daniel recovered faster than Michael. He always did. "This is about safety," Daniel said, more controlled now. "She fell. She lives alone. We're trying to make sure she's protected." Thomas nodded once, as if acknowledging a reasonable argument. "And yet," he said, "you introduced the concept of supervision within hours of her regaining consciousness." Daniel's expression tightened. "That's responsible or premature," Thomas replied. The distinction hung there, sharp, uncomfortable. Miss Patel cleared her throat slightly. "Perhaps we should focus on Mrs. Whitmore's current condition and preferences." "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "Let's." All eyes turned back to her, exactly where she wanted them. She adjusted her posture slightly, ignoring the dull ache in her side. "I am not confused," she said. "I am not incapable. And I am not in need of supervision." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because it carried certainty, not performance, not defensiveness, just fact. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but Thomas lifted a hand slightly, not to silence him, but to pause the moment. "Before we continue," Thomas said, "there is something relevant everyone in this room should be aware of." He turned slightly, positioning himself so that both Miss Patel and the sons were included in his line of sight. "Several months ago," he said, "Mrs. Whitmore documented concerns regarding potential coercion related to her financial and residential assets." The words landed like a dropped weight, heavy, irreversible. Michael blinked. "What?" Daniel's voice came sharper. "That's ridiculous." Eleanor didn't move, didn't react, because this wasn't new to her. This was the plan unfolding. Thomas continued, unbothered by the interruption. "These concerns were not speculative," he said. "They were supported by recorded interactions, written communication, and a documented pattern of behavior." Miss Patel's posture changed subtly, more attentive now, more cautious. "Are you saying there's evidence of undue influence?" she asked. "I'm saying," Thomas replied evenly, "that any attempt to establish control over Mrs. Whitmore's decisions will be reviewed under that lens." Silence, this time longer. Because now the conversation had crossed a line. It was no longer about options, or care, or safety. It was about intent. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, frustration breaking through. "This is insane," he said. "We're her sons." "Yes," Eleanor said softly, and for the first time there was something in her voice that carried weight beyond calm, not anger, not grief, recognition. "And that's exactly why this matters." Daniel stopped. Because he didn't know how to answer that, because it wasn't an accusation, it was something worse, a realization. Michael looked between them, unsettled. "Mom, we're just trying to help." Eleanor turned her gaze to him. "I know what you're trying to do," she said, and that sentence did something subtle but powerful. It removed ambiguity. It ended the space where intentions could hide behind softer words. Miss Patel closed her folder slowly. I think, she said carefully, that before we proceed further we need to reassess the situation with full context. Thomas nodded. Agreed. Daniel exhaled sharply. So what now? We just do nothing? No, Eleanor said. She reached toward the table, her hands steady as she touched the edge of Thomas's folder. Now, she continued, we do things properly. The room held still, because something had changed, not in volume, not in tone, in structure. The narrative Daniel and Michael had begun building, the careful layering of concern, safety, supervision, had just been interrupted. Not destroyed, but exposed, and once exposed, it could no longer grow the same way. Thomas gathered the documents again, but didn't put them away, not yet. Mrs. Whitmore will undergo a formal independent evaluation, he said, not arranged through family, not influenced by convenience. Miss Patel nodded. That's reasonable, and until that evaluation is complete, Thomas added, no changes to her living situation will be made. Daniel shook his head slightly. You can't just decide that. Thomas looked at him, calm, unmoved. It's already decided, he said, another silence. This one different, because now the control Daniel thought he had was gone, not taken, revealed to have never been his. Eleanor leaned back slightly against the pillow. For the first time since she had woken up, she felt the balance settle, not fully, not finally, but enough. Enough to know that what came next would not be decided around her. It would be decided with her, and if necessary, against them. The silence didn't break all at once. It shifted, like pressure changing in a sealed room. Daniel was the first to move, but even that movement lacked the certainty he had carried earlier. His hand went to the back of the chair, gripping it, not to sit, not to lean, but to anchor himself to something physical. This is getting out of control, he said. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't calm either. Thomas didn't respond. He didn't need to, because Eleanor did. No, she said quietly, this is getting clear. That word again, clear. It cut through everything else, emotion, tone, posture, and landed exactly where it needed to. Michael exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. Mom, you're making this into something it's not. Eleanor turned her head toward him slowly. And what is it? She asked. He hesitated. That was the problem with vague intentions. They sound reasonable until someone asks you to define them. Daniel stepped in again, more forceful now. It's about making sure you don't fall again, that's it. Eleanor held his gaze. And if I hadn't fallen, she asked, a pause, small. But enough, because the answer would have exposed everything. Daniel didn't give one. Instead, he shifted again. That's not the point. It is the point, Eleanor replied, not louder, just firmer, because now she wasn't reacting anymore. She was directing. Thomas stepped slightly to the side, not interrupting, positioning himself where he could observe both sides of the room. Miss Patel remained seated, but her posture had changed completely, no longer neutral. Now attentive in a different way, professional caution, because she understood something important. This was no longer a routine case. Eleanor rested her hands lightly over the blanket. For months, she said, you've both been asking questions. Daniel's expression hardened. We've been planning. No, Eleanor said, you've been measuring. That landed harder, because it was specific, because it was accurate. Michael shook his head. That's not fair, Eleanor looked at him. Fair, she repeated. You started asking about my accounts before you asked how I was sleeping. Michael looked away. Daniel didn't, but something in his posture shifted, just slightly. The kind of shift that happens when a person realizes they're no longer speaking from a position of control, but defense. Thomas spoke then, not to interrupt, but to solidify. All communications referenced have been documented, he said. Dates, context, wording. Daniel's voice sharpened. You've been recording us. Eleanor didn't hesitate. I've been remembering you, she said, and that was worse. Because recording can be argued. Memory, when consistent, when supported, when documented, becomes something harder to dismantle. Miss Patel closed her folder completely now. I think we need to pause, she said carefully. No, Eleanor replied. Everyone looked at her again. This doesn't get paused, she said. This gets finished. The room went still, because there was something in her tone now that hadn't been there before, not just clarity, finality. She shifted slightly, pushing through the discomfort in her side, and sat more upright. I want to ask you both something, she said. Daniel didn't answer. Michael gave a small nod. If I hadn't called anyone, Eleanor continued, what would have happened next? Silence, heavy, unavoidable. Daniel looked at her, then away, then back again. He didn't answer. Michael swallowed. We would have figured things out. How? Eleanor asked. No response, because now the question had shaped direction, and any honest answer would confirm what she already knew. Thomas didn't speak. Miss Patel didn't intervene, because this moment, this exact moment, belonged to Eleanor. You were already telling people I might be confused, she said. Daniel shook his head quickly. We were being cautious. You were being strategic. The word landed like a verdict. Michael stepped forward slightly. Mom, please, no, Eleanor said, and that single word stopped him. Not harsh, not raised, but absolute. I need you to understand something, she continued. Her voice softened, not in weakness, but in control. I raised both of you. I know how you think, I know how you justify things when you've already decided what you want. Daniel's jaw tightened. Michael's shoulders dropped slightly, because there it was, not accusation, recognition. You didn't start with force, Eleanor said. You started with language, safer, better, temporary. She paused, then, and you thought if you said it enough it would become true. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full of realization. Of exposure, of something neither of them had planned for. Daniel finally spoke again, but his voice had changed. Lower, less certain. We were trying to help, he said. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. I believe you think that, she said, and that sentence did something subtle. It separated intention from truth. Michael's voice came quieter now. Then what do you want? Eleanor leaned back slightly, not retreating, settling. I want my life back, she said, simple, clear, unarguable, and I want this to stop, she added. Daniel frowned. Stop what? Eleanor met his eyes directly. The part where you decide who I am before I do. That was it. That was the line, and once spoken, it couldn't be taken back. Miss Patel exhaled slowly. I think, she said, we have a very clear understanding now. Thomas nodded once. Yes, he said. We do. He turned slightly toward Miss Patel. We'll proceed with an independent evaluation, he said, and all further discussions will include full documentation. She nodded. Agreed. Daniel looked between them, frustration giving way to something else now. Not anger, not denial, loss. You're choosing a lawyer over your own sons, he said. Eleanor didn't react immediately. Because that question wasn't about logic, it was about leverage, emotion. She answered it anyway. I'm choosing clarity over confusion, she said. Another silence. This one quieter, heavier in a different way. Michael stepped back, sitting down again slowly. Daniel didn't move. For the first time since he had walked into the room, he didn't seem to know where to stand. Eleanor watched him, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with something more complicated, something closer to acceptance. Because the truth wasn't just that they had tried to control her. It was that they had believed they could, and belief, once broken, doesn't rebuild easily. I'm still your mother, she said, softer now. Both of them looked at her. But I am not your responsibility, she added, and that was the final piece, not rejection, boundary, clear, unmovable. Thomas gathered his documents. Miss Patel stood. The structure of the room had changed again, not tense, not chaotic, defined. Daniel looked at Eleanor one last time. There were words there, unspoken, maybe even unformed, but they didn't come out. Because there was nothing left to argue without admitting too much. Michael stood slowly, glancing between them. We'll talk later, he said. Eleanor nodded once. Yes, she said, but her tone made something clear. Later wouldn't undo this. The door opened, they stepped out, and just like that, they were gone. The room fell quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one wasn't uncertain, it wasn't heavy, it was resolved. Eleanor leaned back against the pillow, exhaling slowly. The pain in her side was still there, her body still needed time, but something deeper, something far more important had already healed. Thomas remained beside her. You handled that exactly right, he said. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. I didn't handle it, she replied. I ended it. He allowed himself the faintest smile. Yes, he said. You did. She opened her eyes again, looking at the ceiling, still white, still clinical, but no longer distant, because now it wasn't where she was stuck, it was just where she had passed through. They thought I was falling, she said quietly. Thomas didn't respond. He didn't need to, because Eleanor already knew the truth. She hadn't fallen behind. She had simply been watching, waiting. And when the moment came, she stood exactly where she needed to be, not as a patient, not as a problem, but as the one person in the room who had seen everything clearly from the start and refused to let anyone else rewrite it.